Indeed, he was as white as a bit of paper. Isn't it a dreadful idea that he should have cried? Cried! Who ever heard of a grown man crying from fear? Not a child, but a man who never had cried before, a grown man of 45 years. Imagine what must have been going on in that man's mind at such a moment, what dreadful convulsions his whole spirit must have endured. It is an outrage on the soul, that's what it is. Because it is said, 'Thou shalt not kill,' is he to be killed because he murdered someone else? No, it is not right, it's an impossible theory. I assure you, I saw the sight a month ago, and it's dancing before my eyes to this moment. I dream of it, often." The prince had grown animated as he spoke, and a tinge of colour suffused his pale face, though his way of talking was as quiet as ever. The servant followed his words with sympathetic interest. Clearly he was not at all anxious to bring the conversation to an end. Who knows? Perhaps he too was a man of imagination and with some capacity for thought. "Well, at all events, it is a good thing that there's no pain when the poor fellow's head flies off," he remarked. "Do you know, though," cried the prince warmly, "you made that remark now, and everyone says the same thing, and the machine is designed with the purpose of avoiding pain, this guillotine, I mean. But a thought came into my head then. What if it be a bad plan, after all? You may laugh at my idea, perhaps, but I could not help its occurring to me all the same. Now with the rack and tortures and so on, you suffer terrible pain, of course, but then your torture is bodily pain only, although no doubt you have plenty of that, until you die. But here, I should imagine the most terrible part of the whole punishment is, not the bodily pain at all, but the certain knowledge that in an hour, then in 10 minutes, then in half a minute, then now, this very instant, your soul must quit your body, and that you will no longer be a man, and that this is certain, certain. That's the point, the certainty of it. Just that instant when you place your head on the block and hear the iron grate over your head, then, that quarter of a second is the most awful of all. This is not my own fantastical opinion. Many people have thought the same, but I feel it so deeply that I'll tell you what I think. I believe that to execute a man for murder is to punish him immeasurably more dreadfully than is equivalent to his crime. A murder by sentence is far more dreadful than a murder committed by a criminal. The man who is attacked by robbers at night, in a dark wood or anywhere, undoubtedly hopes and hopes that he may yet escape until the very moment of his death. There are plenty of instances of a man running away or imploring for mercy, at all events hoping on in some degree, even after his throat was cut. But in the case of an execution, that last hope, having which it is so immeasurably less dreadful to die, is taken away from the wretch, and certainty substituted in its place. There is his sentence, and with it that terrible certainty that he cannot possibly escape death, which I consider must be the most dreadful anguish in the world. You may place a soldier before a cannon's mouth in battle, and fire upon him, and he will still hope. But read to that same soldier his death sentence, and he will either go mad or burst into tears. Who dares to say that any man can suffer this without going mad? No, no! It is an abuse, a shame. It is unnecessary. Why should such a thing exist? Doubtless there may be men who have been sentenced, who have suffered this mental anguish for a while, and then have been reprieved. Perhaps such men may have been able to relate their feelings afterwards. Our Lord Christ spoke of this anguish and dread. No, 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 no man should be treated so. No man, no man. The servant, though of course he could not have expressed all this as the prince did, still clearly entered into it and was greatly conciliated, as was evident from the increased amiability of his expression. "If you are really very anxious for a smoke," he remarked, "I think it might possibly be managed, if you are very quick about it. You see, they might come out and inquire for you, and you wouldn't be on the spot. You see that door there? Go in there and you'll find a little room on the right. You can smoke there, only open the window, because I ought not to allow it, really, and—" But there was no time after all. A young fellow entered the ante-room at this moment, with a bundle of papers in his hand. The footman hastened to help him take off his overcoat. The new arrival glanced at the prince out of the corners of his eyes. "This gentleman declares, Gavrila Ardalionovitch," began the man confidentially and almost familiarly, "that he is Prince Muishkin and a relative of Madame Epanchin's. He has just arrived from abroad, with nothing but a bundle by way of luggage." The prince did not hear the rest, because at this point the servant continued his communication in a whisper. Gavrila Ardalionovitch listened attentively, and gazed at the prince with great curiosity. At last he motioned the man aside and stepped hurriedly towards the prince. "Are you Prince Muishkin?" he asked with the greatest courtesy and amiability. He was a remarkably handsome young fellow of some 28 summers, fair and of middle height. He wore a small beard, and his face was most intelligent. Yet his smile, in spite of its sweetness, was a little thin, if I may so call it, and showed his teeth too evenly. His gaze, though decidedly good-humoured and ingenuous, was a trifle too inquisitive and intent to be altogether agreeable. Probably when he is alone he looks quite different, and hardly smiles at all, thought the prince. He explained about himself in a few words, very much the same as he had told the footman and Rogojin beforehand. Gavrila Ardalionovitch meanwhile seemed to be trying to recall something. "Was it not you, then, who sent a letter a year or less ago, from Switzerland, I think it was, to Elizabetha Prokofievna, Mrs. Epanchin?" "It was." "Oh, then, of course they will remember who you are. You wish to see the general? I'll tell him at once. He will be free in a minute. But you had better wait in the antechamber, hadn't you? Why is he here?" he added severely to the man. "I tell you, sir, he wished it himself." At this moment the study door opened, and a military man, with a portfolio under his arm, came out talking loudly, and after bidding good-bye to someone inside, took his departure. "You there, Gania?" cried a voice from the study. "Come in here, will you?" Gavrila Ardalionovitch nodded to the prince and entered the room hastily. A couple of minutes later the door opened again, and the affable voice of Gania cried, "Come in, please, prince." End of Part 1, Chapter 2. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.